about Christmas markets, indeed. There we go. Okay, and a suitably apt, a little old actually. We were discussing this last night, how old that Calgary skyline is, but the snow has or is flying, landing, hanging out around us. So we thought we'd change the theme. We've gone to winter theme for this morning. For those of you, if there's anybody who's brand new this morning, do feel free to let us know in the chat. We would love to make that connection. And for those of you returning, part of our Fridays when we hang out together here is an acknowledgement to the land where we are, whether you're out east or west, or maybe you're not even here in Canada, welcome. For SAIT, our main campus is based in Calgary, and it's important to us to acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, that encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda, as well as the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT also acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region. And whether you're here or not, thank you just for taking a minute to recognize where you learn, live, laugh, work, whatever you're doing today. There's an incredible heritage underneath our feet, and recognizing that is a really important step for all of us. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, as usual, always so well done. So Jenny, we wanted to talk today about the power of healthy tensions, and clearly it's caught the attention of a few folks, but maybe let's level set a little bit and just kind of talk about tension, because I'm sure it stirs up all sorts of thoughts for folks that have joined us, but I know you've got a couple slides pulled together just to kind of set the stage here. So why don't you kick that piece off?
Do you notice how unfamiliar that is? Jenny, you have some slides.
I know you always have them. We never get to them.
I do. I often have them, but we don't use them. So we're going to use them today, just a couple. And because it's we can go anywhere this morning, which is kind of cool. So I thought we'd start with, what is tension? This is lifted from a dictionary, 4 different things that tension can be. And I think immediately we'll all pick up 1 or 2 that sort of connect with us on a day-to-day basis. And then as I was noodling, so the idea for this conversation actually came from a Harvard Business Review article that Craig had stumbled across. And both of us quite liked it. And we'll share some of that with you in just a minute. So I'm thinking, okay, tension, how does this work? And it dawns on me that we can't create music unless we have tension. There's a whole physics behind it. And everybody who's been here before, no numbers and nothing sensible. Physics is very sensible, but you can't make music unless you have tension. You can't actually ride your bike unless you have tension. So my head went to leadership and momentum and moving forwards. And maybe the music is the harmony on your team. There's Friday morning for you. But also when we think about leadership, and I think this is the tricky bit for us, is we have they're either 2 thoughts, 2 demands, 2 objectives, whatever it might be, and they're in conflict. And it's that conflict, that misalignment, that causes the tension. And our brains don't actually like that. So what we call it is cognitive dissonance. Our brains like to be very simply in equilibrium. And when we don't have that, I'm not quite sure why I had brain ache, but that's what we get. It feels like an ache. It's a tension. It's not comfortable. And we are creatures of comfort. So there's kind of a background to tension where we could start with. So in the article that we both read, and we will ensure that everybody has the link to that article in the follow-up materials, there were 7, I believe, 7 tensions. It's right there on the screen, Jenny, that leaders need to navigate. And these 7 tensions sit very squarely sort of with us as a leader. And then in sort of digging around and thinking about it a bit, I came up with, I was going to say 5, 6 more, see if I don't do numbers, more tensions. So now you've got a whole ton of tension on the screen. And I think probably the next question is, which ones stand out? Which ones are predominant in your world? Which ones are harder to deal with? And that would be a good point for me to stop talking and hand over to you, Craig, for a minute.
Yeah, no, so what I really liked about this article is it's an interesting one, because I think often when we say the word tension at work, I think
Mhm.
there's immediately perhaps a negative reaction. I'd be curious if folks wanted to respond to that. If we say, there's tension at work, what's your gut reaction, right? Typically,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I'm going to do my best and shut up for 1 second just to see if people do put a word in there. See, there's some tension, right? Just in the silence.
Value the pause. It's okay to stop. There we go.
Exactly. I knew if I waited, folks have to type. Discomfort, being on alert, uncomfortable. Absolutely. Typically people go, eek. I love it. There we go. How fascinating, right, Jenny?
We can go
Yeah,
there.
exactly. So there's a ton of negativity in here, right? And
Mhm.
talking about tension at work. And so the article, when we were looking at it, really is looking at the tensions leaders can feel internally, right?
Mhm.
The expert versus the learner. Historically, leaders have always thought to have been the expert and being able to share from the top down versus showing that they are learning. There's another, I love this though, Donna, it's also a little invigorating. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Mhm.
So there's these internal tensions that we're talking about here, expert versus learner, constant versus adapter, et cetera. But there's also external tension that a leader can create. I kind of threw this one at Jenny before we kicked off the conversation, is that, there's times I think it's good for leaders to intentionally create tension. And I'd be curious, Jenny, on your thought on that, because I do want to touch on the external piece about how you can positively use tension, and then talk
Yeah.
about, as a leader, how do you navigate these tensions internally? So
where are we going to start? Allison?
let's go with the external. Let's go with
Okay.
leaders creating tension, because I think when I look at I'm pointing at the chat because I know you can all see it. But when we talk about tension at work, I think what we're seeing here is that their folks have a bit of a reaction to it, right? So how do we positively use tension in the workplace?
Okay, so I think there's several things for us to contemplate at this point. First off, know your people, because some people will do very, very well in that stretched, in that strained. They love it. They love the pressure. They love that part. So you got to know your people. And then the other thing that stands out is, what kind of tension are we creating? So, and I think if we go way back when we were talking about psychological safety one day, it's not about being nice. And where the work that we sort of play in, if you get it wrong, you think that we're just creating a fun fest at work and everybody has to be super nice to each other and everybody has to be really friendly. And yes, respect the people around you 100%. But the whole point behind these environments that we're trying to create is that when we have to have those nitty-gritty conversations, they can happen. And so the piece becomes, how do you create that tension, hold people capable, accountable, whichever way you want to look at it, but still maintain the environment of support, the environment of I've got your back. And support and I've got your back does not mean I'm going to wrap you up in a fluffy blanket and make sure that you're completely okay. It means that I respect you. It means that I'm going to hold you to what I believe you're capable of. And it means that we're going to have a good conversation. And a good conversation doesn't mean that we are laughing and it's all lovely. A good conversation sometimes can be, this is what we're expecting. This is where we're at. What's going on? And that might be the start of it. And now there's that part in there. And I think some of it, we don't like to be uncomfortable. I said that at the beginning, we are creatures of comfort. And if you talk about emotion, people always want to go positive, negative. Actually, they just are. But these are so uncomfortable, we will do anything we can to kind of avoid them. And as leaders, I think we do that a lot as well, because it is uncomfortable. We want to get the day job and be high performing. We have to have that sort of, it's friction really is what we talk about. And then we lean into the ensure that it's in intellectual friction. So if I'm not cutting it, our conversation is about the task, the behavior, what I'm doing that isn't reaching where we need me to be. It's not about me as a person.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's that productive friction or productive conflict that you need to strive for. Like, it is okay, as in this is my opinion, it is okay as a leader to have somebody who's reporting you who is not meeting the mark, for example, or not producing on time or producing the right quantity of results. It's okay to have that conversation, have them leave it feeling uncomfortable.
I think you
right?
have to.
Yeah. And I think I struggle sometimes in that. I think you used the phrase earlier, chain or confuse good conversation with happy.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. And it's okay. It's to your point, it's really difficult. Right. I'm not suggesting that as a leader, I would enjoy those type of conversations, but I'm saying that it is necessary sometimes to create that tension intentionally. Man, I'm gonna have to switch that up.
And I think too that as you go into those conversations, you can almost, if it is really uncomfortable, you can preface that with, this is a tricky conversation. Like there's nothing wrong in setting where you're at, but my intention is, well, what is your intention? And now we're on the same page. And I think the other key thing is in this, and this is where it gets tricky, is there's a lot of us in here, and we've still a lot of leaders who have done the job before. And that's why we're a leader, because we were good at the job, rightly or wrongly, that's how it's happened. And so we think we know the answer. We have it all. So this is a really quick fix. And if you would just listen to me, we would get that number right up there. And that's not a good conversation. That's an awful lot of, in this case, you talking and me like, now I feel like I'm back at school. That's a discomfort, and that's not one I choose to be in.
Right.
And so that, what is it? There's almost an ignorance and a willing to maybe see it slightly differently at the end of the conversation. I'm not saying back off on creating the tension, but still hold that open mind so that you hear me. I need space in the conversation too.
100%, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're trying to address there is the problem off to the side here, right? It's an Amy Edmondson cartoon or drawing, I believe, where you take the problem, instead of it being in between us, we're now looking at the problem together. Right?
Yeah.
You're trying to create that tension around solving that problem. I do want to call out here, folks, if you haven't read it, and this is where I get this tension of following the chat and listening to Jenny. Deanne, great analogy in here, as Tim has pointed out, and Jennifer, thank you. Tension with intention. Anyway, there's a good way to phrase that. But Deanne, that is really good. The piece around conflict, etc. So I love that. So Jenny, in that example you were just sharing with us, right? The teller, if you would just listen to me, right? One of the tensions in that HBR article is the teller versus the listener. And I wonder if we could expand on that one a little bit more. And I'm curious for folks with us today, the comment in the article is that the traditional approach to leadership calls for leaders to tell others what to do and how to do it. The emerging approach values listening to others very carefully before deciding. So I'm not sure what that triggers, but Jenny, what are your thoughts here?
So I'm not sure if the article mentions it or not. My head goes straight back to, we used to work in the world of control and command. And that died years ago. We all know that died years ago. There are a lot of places actually that haven't had the funeral for it yet, truly. And we're now in a space where we have a lot, not everybody, but a lot of leaders who their entire career was modeled by that. And it was tell. And I think that the way that work has changed, and the way that we've changed as well, like that recognition that, we show up as adults that want to do a good job. And so the tension comes between, sometimes it is just faster and more efficient for me to tell you what to do. And there are guardrails, and most of us want guardrails to work within. We, as much as we chat about it, we really don't want complete freedom. That's a little bit confusing. And it's like herding wet cats if everybody has complete freedom. And so there is a degree of telling. Here's the tension. And then, I think the move now is, okay, figure out what is black and white. Like there really isn't any negotiation on this because it's our day job or because it's come from up there and we don't have a choice. But the key is, are you listening as well? And we're not really very good at listening. We hear all the time, but we don't really listen to the people. And in fact, I think last time we were here, Heather talked about those 3 levels of listening, didn't she? We're really good at 1 or 2, which is either me or you. But what about that bubble piece? And sometimes that's time, and that's okay. And sometimes that's just pure ego. And we know that we've got the right way and they're wrong. And that's a disaster the minute that we run into that. So it's what's sort of going on for you. And I think the other one too, and this takes me, I think it's Adam Grant, pretty sure it's Adam Grant. If I'm telling, I am pulling you. That's the tension. I want to pull you over to my side. And if I am telling and listening, which to me is a conversation, there's a cadence to that. So we're both talking, it's going backwards and forwards. Rather than a pull like a tug of war, it becomes a dance. And the minute that you can dance, you have the option to sidestep, you have the option to turn in terms of who's in control, who's leading. You have the option to, to go somewhere slightly different than that. Literally, I've got to get you over here. And so maybe that's a good way for us to think of it as we enter into it, is this is actually more of a dance. And if we can actually work in sort of harmony, we could get to a better end.
Yeah, no, 100%. And clearly there's going to be times when we're talking safety, compliance, et cetera, where you may need to tell, right? You're going to have to be a teller. I think the other thing that comes into it for me is, as a leader, where is your expectation, right? Is your expectation on the outcome? Is your expectation on the process to get to the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. Is your expectation on the timing you would see it being able to be done today? Or is it okay if it's 2 weeks from now, for example, mm-hmm. right? Which, and as a leader, how do you figure out, I guess the simple answer there is tell folks what your expectation is. Sorry, I'm answering my questions again, Jenny. We know this is the tension I struggle with here, right? But there's so much in that. Is that how do you, as a leader, I think sometimes you got to be vulnerable enough to be able to accept that there's 100 ways of probably doing something. Just because you might have 1 or 2 or 3 ways doesn't mean that the other 97 ways that somebody else might do it aren't going to be just as effective to them.
And I love that. Yes, like we're not mind readers. So your expectation has got to be laid out clearly. But the other thing that, I sort of drop in there as a noodle is expectations. Depends on who you are and what your team does, but they can be quite suffocating. Like expectation is a line. And there's 101 possibilities here as well. So there's the telling and the listening. Here's the expectation. And what are the possibilities that we can also step into? Now, this does depend on the kind of work that you do. But, if you and I are hanging out and you say to me, Jenny, my expectation is I need this. It's a 2-hour delivery, this, and this. I can work to that expectation. Okay. And I can also say, oh, yeah, and we could do this, and this. And at that point, as a leader, your brain is going to slap some more guardrails on me. Jenny, it needs to be done next week, not next year. Okay, let's bring this in a little bit further. Or, Jenny, that's a great idea. And this project doesn't have the budget for that. However, let's keep that because we can build on that and we can look at that next time we decide to stop and look at our product or whatever way that's going. And so expectations are crucial, not taking that away at all. and know your people, because some people just need the expectation they're going to go, that's their day job, and we have to be happy with that. And there are others that are going to want to bounce into that, and that's a tension. It's annoying, but it is a possibility. And that's where I think that listening comes in, that it doesn't have to be the way it's always been. We can listen beyond in there as well, and that's when it gets exciting for a lot of people, and then we're engaged and we can do the boring stuff much easier.
Yeah. And I love this last comment here. Understanding my expectations and realizing I didn't always communicate them well helped me have more compassion and experience less frustration. Like, so true. It's just, for me, it's always funny though, because you get wrapped up in the need for productivity, need to produce, get into your timelines, and wanting to move things ahead quickly and get it done. Right? Let's just get it done. So
I don't think there's anything wrong with that either.
yeah.
Like,
Good question from Tim. Even though you're enjoying 30-degree warmer weather than we are, how can we acknowledge tension in a conversation without taking away from the conversation?
that's those levels of listening. And it sounds funny when you talk about it in this situation. It's actually incredibly effective when it happens in a conversation. Is if you're listening at that third level, you will notice a change in, even just in eye structure. You'll notice a change in body language. You'll notice a change in approach. And I honestly think it's recognizing it, Tim, as you just say, it's acknowledging it. And so, Craig, notice that your tone of voice has changed a little bit, or your enthusiasm seems to have waned in this conversation. Is there something we need to come back to? And at this point, we're back to, we've mentioned already, so we're back to that psychological safety. If we have it, this isn't sitting well with me, or I felt that approach is going to just demean my sense. I can't, it's Friday, I'm not grabbing the words that I need. But once we acknowledge it, we give that person the opportunity to recognize where the tension is and embrace the tension. And I think when we embrace the tension, we don't have to necessarily agree to disagree. But I think by embracing the tension, that's the point where we can begin to dance, because we can work in concert together and sort of figure that out. But we have to have that relationship to be able to figure that out. If you don't know the person in front of you, that's a really tricky. I would suggest it's not going to happen, actually.
Yeah, no, it is an interesting one. And thanks, Tim. I'm glad, as always, Jenny seems to hit the mark on these answers. I do think there's, and I think sometimes where leaders can struggle, or we can all struggle, is not by acknowledging it at the outset. Listen, Jenny, I think this might be a challenging conversation for us to have, right? Mm-hmm. I've got some nervousness or some tension about it, but I'm hoping we can have an open mind. Sometimes that can help just also set the stage, right? It could also raise tension in the immediate, those microseconds after you state it. But I think it's important. Nobody goes into these difficult conversations looking forward to them and loving them, right? So it's okay to admit up front that you're also not comfortable with the conversation that you're about to start. So, but I think we sometimes just forget that practical step, because as leaders, we feel we have to have the answers and we have to have these conversations. So I'm just going to go ahead and have the conversation, right?
And I think so that, as you're saying there, the worst thing that we can do is stick our head in the sand and think it will get better. And because it never ever does. And so, as you say, take it on.
Yeah, well, because often if you're looking to address something, if you then stick your head in the sand and hope it gets better and it doesn't, you're essentially, approving or, whatever the issue is, you've now normalized it and made it okay.
Mm-hmm. Right? That's a really good point.
Yep. Right? You didn't address it with me 6 months ago. Why are you addressing it with me now? Right?
Yeah. And then
no, go ahead.
You get what you tolerate. Remember that too.
Sorry?
You get what you tolerate.
Yeah, that's what I think of as searching for there. You touched on another tension in your example about, Jenny, I need this delivery for this time. And you said, well, yeah, but we could do this and this as well. So this was kind of another tension that came up in the article that I thought was interesting, was the perfectionist versus the accelerator, right? Traditional approach says leaders should take time to deliver a perfectly finished product. More modern approach says, let's go ahead, do something quickly and fail fast and learn from it. So yeah,
This is a good tension, isn't it?
I'm still not sure I fully embrace this concept of failure. I get the concept of, you need to learn from your failures. This whole concept of embracing failure as an approach, I'm not sure. There's something about it that just sits funny with me, but I try to reframe it in that let's learn from our mistakes. But
that's a phenomenal awareness right there. Like, we all just need that awareness. And I don't know, I wonder for the Gen Zs if it's anywhere as close, but for those of us, I would say sort of Gen Y, Gen X, definitely this, embrace your failures. It really doesn't sit well with a lot of people, and we've been taught to a degree. A lot of us have been taught as well towards that perfectionist alley. And we have to remember too, perfectionism, a lot of perfectionism is in fact that we don't like the uncomfortable feelings that come if we don't get it right. And so, there's a tangent in there, but let's hang out with this perfectionist accelerator, fail fast. I think it depends on the work that you do. Right? There are some products or whatever that end result is, where it has to be the best that it can be. And I think the other thing too is that when we're talking about failing fast, and that is a curious term, but let's use it for now, we're not talking about putting the company at risk. So those are always the small experiments, small steps that we would take. And we've had this, Craig, we've had clients where we've worked with people who have really embraced that. Let's try something different. And we've had the safety to run it slightly differently with their people. And that's a learning part on both sides. Do they still get an excellent product? Yes. Is it perfect? No, but we knew that going in. And so if in that tension that HBR talks about, if you weren't being the accelerator, you'd put the brakes on that and you'd be like, no, we are not doing that. We will not take that risk, I suppose it is. But when the risk is set up well, and it's an intelligent safety, because if it goes wrong, we've already got the bounds in place. So I think it's understanding where we need that degree of perfection and where we need to move forwards, and who plays what role in those conversations. And the other thing I'd like to just mention here, especially for leaders and that perfectionist piece, how does it go? It's 3 Ps. If you're being perfect, constantly proving yourself and or pleasing everyone around you, that is an impossible world for connection. And it's the connection between us that really allows us to embrace these tensions and make the most of them.
Really good point. Love it. A couple good comments that came in here, Glenn. I like that. Yes. Fail fast, get over it fast. Absolutely. But I think, again, for me, I think ultimately what this whole fail fast piece is about is what your next comment was there, Glenn, is, move on and assess what happened and how it affects what you're going to do next. I think this is more of an exercise in, I'll call it quick reflection and learning, right? Don't make the same mistake twice. Thomas, yeah, absolutely. The biggest learning moments from when things go wrong, 100%. Sarah, like that. Perfectionism is also about controlling. And I think, Jenny, that's what you were touching on there. So I think the other key thing that you touched on there is this whole concept of risk and how you're assessing that. I think it's Jeff Bezos, not that I'm the greatest lover of Jeff Bezos, but he talks about level 1 and level 2 decision making, right? A level 1 decision is the kind of decision that could, end your company if you go and make that decision. Level 2 decisions are, might be a financial hit, might be something, but it's not going to end your company. So in this pursuit of perfect versus quick, you need to be playing more in those level 2 conversations, I think, than,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I want to just catch something. It was further up in the chat. They fly by so fast. Thomas had mentioned lessons learned at the end of projects, which is a great practice. And I think something now that's becoming quite popular and is really helpful. So we're all about review. Okay, what did we want? What did we get? What caused the in-between piece? And the key is let the review lead into a preview. And so, in terms of that sort of accelerating and moving faster, what happens with those lessons learned at the end? And where do we share them to? Who else could benefit from that? And so then next time we start, don't wait for the lessons learned. Start with here's what we've learned. What could get in the way? What are we expecting? And you know what? We're expecting tension to happen along the way. How are we going to handle that when it happens? And if we can do a lot of that in the normal, when it gets turbulent, we're ready to go on that. And so I think that's really cool. That's a real yes and lessons learned, and flip it into a preview, and then we can use that to lift us in the next one too.
Yeah, and the last comment in the chat here: true lessons need to be changed into company knowledge. Right.
Yeah, there we go. That was Joni, that was a really good way of saying my 14 sentences in one. Thank you.
That's okay. You caught a little bit of Craig rambling there. That's okay. And yes, Glenn, absolutely. It only works on small scale. You don't want to learn to drive a car by failing fast and having a high-speed collision. 100%. Again, I think that's kind of into that level 1, level 2, right? Mm-hmm. High-speed collision in your car could be your life. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. Lessons learned should be ongoing and incorporated. 100%. Another tension that the article mentioned, Jenny, and I think it's one leaders sometimes struggle with, is this whole concept of being the expert versus being the learner.
Ooh, yeah.
Right?
That ties in, yeah.
So just quick summary. Traditionally, leaders built their careers by developing deep expertise and then moving up the corporate ladder. In the emerging approach, leaders must accept that their specialized expertise is limited and open to learning from others. So what are your thoughts here?
I've actually been through this one. So when I was a school teacher in England, our job was to have all the answers. Like as a teacher, you had all the answers, pretty much. Slightly different, perhaps sixth form, grade 11, 12, maybe different there, depending. And then when I switched to doing adult ed, I learned very quickly, and probably, I'm going to say the hard way, but it actually wasn't that hard, is that I don't have to have any answers. Actually, the wisdom's always in the room. But it's an interesting tension. And the one I would add to this, I would say, is an expert, a learner, and an unlearner. And I think unlearning is harder than learning. They're similar. We have to unlearn a lot of things as well. And when you're an expert, unlearning what you believe you're an expert in, okay, that is going to play with that ego just a little bit in there as well. Yeah. So we still see in a lot of companies, people are promoted because they're good at their job. They're an expert in that. And so whenever we're talking leadership, the first thing we say is, do you like people? If you don't like people, get off that ladder, because it's really not going to work for you. And so, that's a tension in itself too. You used to do the job, you used to be brilliant at the job, but now actually your job is the people who now do the job that you used to do, who may have a different way. And so I think, again, is the word humility is almost an ability to stand back and look at yourself as a person and just pay attention to the tension. We're rolling them today. But, when you do that, your expertise is still useful. And we have so many transferable skills too. So even as everything changes, you're going to be able to carry those skills across. But when we start to learn as well from the people around us, we really provide value. Not provide value, we see the value, we get the value from our team. And now that becomes a different chemistry as we begin to work with that value that's in the room. But you can't do that if you don't have the mindset that I can learn from them. And, you know, so as a leader, every week, what are you learning? What are you learning from different people on your team? And that can go, you know, that can go so far. We can take that a long way. And it comes back to, I think that you always hear me say, I love this quote, be more interested. That's what learning is. When we become more interested, then we find out more, and then we can, you can really work with those nuggets that actually wouldn't come out if you weren't interested.
Yeah, I think you already somewhat pre-answered Sarah's question here. You know, the tension for me came from the team itself, who got to push back on my leadership because I didn't have subject matter expertise in what they did. And Sarah, thank you for the vulnerable question here. How do you tackle that, right?
And you know, to the point below, I think the point below just came to us, actually didn't go into the regular chat. Sarah, some of the best leaders don't have expertise in what they're leading. There are some companies actually that will put their leaders in charge of departments that they don't have that background expertise in, because now the concentration can become from the people. Your concentration can be on the people, and you can really lean into what they bring to the table. So your job is to lead, their job is the expertise of it. It's a mindset shift for them, maybe for you too, but it's a mindset shift for them, and helping them to shift that mindset. And you know, when we look at those tensions, there's a couple of tensions that they've got in there. They're being tellers, you can't do this because you are this. Well, maybe we could, you know, shift into, let's listen to each other, and let's build that agreement, the agreements that are within the room. And here's the role that I will play, and here's where we need you guys to grow in your role as well. So I think the way you tackle it is chat, conversation again.
100%. And Jenny, it's so funny that we've been doing these conversations so long, and Ted Lasso doesn't come up very frequently, but there you go. You've got Ted Lasso in the chat here now as the example. I can't believe you haven't seen it. Just like you can't believe I don't. Just like you can't believe I don't go to Christmas markets. So you know, we're even. But you know, that's a great example of somebody who, you know, you're there to lead people. You're there to lead a team and get the best out of the team. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to know their roles to perfection. And frankly, why would they need you as a leader if you knew how to do it perfectly? Right. Yeah. And so there's something there. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
For, I think it was Sarah, David Marquet's earlier books, Turn the Ship Around. And there's a little 9-minute video clip as well, because he had to run a submarine that he had no knowledge for. And there's some really good stuff in there about leading a team where you don't know all the ins and outs and all the expertise within those. So if you haven't come across that, Sarah, that might be handy.
Yeah, no, that's good. And yeah, Glenn, absolutely. Ask your team that question. What would you do to solve this problem? Right? Enlist them, get their feedback, get their ideas. I think the other thing I think of is another good example here for me is like sport coaches, hockey team coaches, right? You don't often see the greatest, well, let's face it, Wayne Gretzky did not have the greatest coaching career, right? And a lot of the coaches that you see right now weren't necessarily Hall of Fame players. So, right, it's very much in that piece for me. So it's a great question. I love it. Jenny, we probably got time for one more tension here. And I'm just trying to go through here. So here's the one for me that I think is interesting, this whole piece of being the tactician versus the visionary. And I kind of look at this as the need to focus on implementing and getting results today versus where we're going to be 2, 3, 4, whatever your cycle of your business is. And how do you balance, that tension? So I think of it from my career's been in sales. How do you make sure you're delivering the number today and also setting up your ability to deliver future results? And how do you keep your team, shifting and focused as needed between one and the other? I don't know. What does that trigger for you?
It's funny, actually, we've just mentioned him. David Marquet refers to that tension as the execute, innovate tension.
Okay.
And he relates execution, he calls it red work, and innovation is blue work. And it is a tension. You've got to execute on the day job. But if you're just being busy executing, you don't have the time to say, how can we make this better? How can we set this up? How can we move forward? And so as a leader in there, your job is to create that time, is to make time for that. And it's not, we need a 2-day out retreat to go be innovative. And it's not, that's the innovations team's job. It's, we've been on full fly for X amount of time executing. Create the pause. What's getting in our way? What are the constraints? What's holding us up? And to your point, where are we going? What are we going to do that's different? And it requires a little bit of flexibility to be able to work between the two. And I think the problem here is if the leader doesn't make time for it, it is not going to happen. And so, we saw this a little bit in the pandemic where people were flying, but actually the ones that came out ahead were the ones that paused first, took a good look at it, and then started executing. And then paused again. Okay, how's this working? What can we make better? And then executed. So we're not saying in every day, maybe not even in every week, but where's that pause coming in? And if you're going to do that with your team, you're going to need to do that for yourself. And there's that piece too, even we talked about these being internal. Are you doing that for yourself as a leader too? Here's what I'm executing, here's what I'm doing, here's where I want to be as a leader as well.
Yeah, it's I love that, right? And it's such an interesting, at least I found in my sales career, it's such an interesting balance to try and maintain, right?
It is,
yeah. Anyway, so Jenny, we're at 1:45, 8:44. This has flown past. As you were getting ready to share, I just want to put a question out to the group because we have our final conversation of 2022. Tough to believe 2022. I think we started these, Jenny, back in 2020. Yeah, it's just for me somewhat fascinating now that we're here. we were kind of thinking of doing the the Spotify greatest hits list from 2022 in our final conversation. I am curious, folks, if there's any particular topic, if you're going to be so kind as to join us again in a couple of weeks, is there anything you would like to hear us talk about at the end of the year? As I look back on what we've talked about already this year, we've talked about creating effective boundaries. We've talked about, creating a culture of feedback. How do you instill accountability? We've had some very tactical and practical conversations around business writing, as an example. So if there's anything here, as we're getting ready to wrap up, please do feel free to throw it in the chat and we will think about what we could do for 2 weeks from today. But with Jenny now ready to take us home. Well, I'm actually already home, and Shane, yes, if you notice the little jersey here in the corner, I will happily create the tension of talking about Gretzky in Calgary.
Oh dear. All right, as we finish off today, always our aim. In fact, you know what, next week we're going to have lots of applied strategies. My aim is to give you one for everything that comes up. So get those topics into the chat because we will give you lots of stuff to take away if you can come and join us on the 16th. I think that's our next one. Pretty sure that's it. So the one big idea for today is actually pay attention to the tension. We think as leaders, we have to solve them. We have to break them. That's not going to help us. We really do want to see them and pay attention to them, perhaps embrace them a little bit. So we often say, just do something. Actually, for these, just stand there. Okay, scan. What are the signals in the noise? Where is the tension getting a little too fraught? Where would it make sense for us to dance for a little bit? Pay attention, I think, is the biggest one. These are necessary. They're healthy. And if we pay attention, we can get a much better reality of how it looks. So 2 things that we can take away. The first one as a leader is absolute self-awareness. When you think of all those tensions that appeared on that earlier slide, and you will get a copy of the slides, there will be some where you're like, no problem, I'm pretty ambidextrous in there, I can move backwards and forwards. And there will be others where you're like, oh yeah, that's tricky. So, know where you're comfortable, know what your default is, and then what can you do to embrace in the others. And so that's the next piece is when we can become self-aware, we really want to grow. So take 5-10 minutes, look at the slide, circle the ones that are not sitting well with you. What is one tiny thing that you could do to embrace that side of the tension? And I promise you, you will grow as a leader at that point. The other thing that you can take away, I love this. I got to hang out with Calgary Public Library last week. Greatest people ever. And one of the leaders in there, she's brilliant. And we were talking about collaboration, and we were talking about friction in collaboration. And she said, I often remind my people we're at the library. And her point was, there are some jobs where it's full tension, it's life or death, it's, that's a different category. But for most of us, we're at the library and just breathe and have the conversation, and then we will go to better places. But attention isn't the end of the world. Our brains want to create it into something that is much worse than it is. And if you haven't been to the library downtown, by the way, it's well worth going there. It's just a pause as well. So, carry that. Where are you? How seriously do we have to really take this? And please don't get me wrong on that, seriously. It is serious. Our work is serious. But we don't have to ruin our health over the tensions that are there. There's a better way to deal with it. So I like that statement. Lena, if you're here today, thank you. 3 questions, Craig, it's just 3. I met your expectation. There you go. And so as you leave today, who sees it differently than you? That's often the thing with tensions. We cannot see the other side. So who can? Go have a conversation with them and really, be interested. Let them do most of the talking. Where could you be a little bit more ambidextrous and flex between the two, and talk to your team about those two? And as always, it's definitely about curiosity. And that's a key piece in there. I think when we embrace that curiosity, it's really easy to embrace that second strategy. Okay, this is where we're at. Here's what we're going to do next to go up the steps from there.
Excellent.
There you go.
Thank you. And yes, our favorites from 2022, I'm seeing some great comments in here: burnout, self-awareness, business writing. So we're going to have lots to pick from, Jenny. And I know
All right.
You constantly bring your A+ game to these conversations, and we're going to have a lot to be able to share in a couple of weeks' time. So have a fantastic day, everybody. Stay warm. Have a great weekend. Tim will ship some of this cold weather east for you, and mostly because I know the Canadians are in Edmonton tomorrow night, so we can have that conversation later. But have a fantastic day. Jenny, thank you, and take care.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.